Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 213. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're excited to have with us the internationally acclaimed comic book creators of Frankenstein Unconquered, Dalton K. Shannon and Wells Thompson.
Hey.
Hi. How's it going, guys?
It's going great. I am just so glad to know that we are internationally beloved now.
We have fans in Canada and at least one that I know of in the UK. So
that's great. Okay, that counts. You know,
right.
I can tell my mom. She's going to be so happy
that you are an internationally acclaimed comic book creator. That is objectively true. So
yeah, I'm going to have to start putting that on the business cards. I got to reprint business cards now.
So congratulations, you two. I did notice your latest Kickstarter blown out of the water. You still have, as of this recording, 2 weeks left of your Kickstarter, and your goal was to reach $5,000, and you are already past 50% over that. You're at 7,600 so far. So
indeed,
congratulations.
Yes. Oh, thank you so
much.
That's amazing. So talk to us a little bit before we jump in and just talking about your Kickstarter. You've all had very successful Kickstarters in the past. Each one you've been able to nail with your three titles. So before we kind of jump in and kind of talk about the background, before we went live, you two have a pretty fun story about working together. But before we kind of jump in and start talking about Frankenstein the Unconquered, the two of you want to talk to the audience, listeners in the audience, a little bit on how you kind of started getting into comic books?
Yeah. So
that was a multi-layered question.
Yeah. It like most origin stories, it takes about 3 films to get through. But no, so I have been a comics guy since I was a kid. Since I was about 8, and I found comics on a spinner rack and just kind of fell in love with them. So I've always wanted to do comics and been kind of writing and drawing since then. Met Wells in college, who had dipped his toes into the comic world with all the stuff you see on top 10 lists. But I was like, hey, I know you're mostly doing prose, but comics? And Wells was like, no, you idiot. And I was like, okay, but comics? And he was like, okay, sure. And we just kind of worked together to bring a lot of nascent ideas that both of us had into something that was tangible that we couldn't quite do on our own. And that's been 5 or 6 years now. And we're still going strong with Frankenstein being the latest success in the long line of successes. We're internationally acclaimed, but more do you want?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I started writing at a pretty young age. I've been of kind of a singular mind about what I've wanted to do for as long as I can remember, really. And that, wrote short stories and stuff all throughout middle school, high school, into college. And started doing screenplays and movies there. Really got really into movies during college. So that was where I kind of wanted my career to end up, as either prose or screenplays. And making films is really hard and really expensive, and it requires a large amount of people to be really on top of their stuff and have everything together and that you trust really, really well. And while I did have some people that I really liked and wanted to trust and get that kind of thing off the ground with, ultimately those attempts just fell through. So I went away, wrote a novel by myself. Publishing is equally difficult to break into in prose. It's a very kind of cutthroat, gatekeepy business. So started talking with Dalton, kind of airing out my woes, and he was like, why not comics? And
gave me a laundry list of reasons why not comics, and all valid.
No, but ultimately it was it was nice to work with someone that I felt I could trust and that I knew wouldn't fall through. And that I respected a lot. As a storyteller, I respect Dalton a lot, so it was easy to kind of give him ideas, take his ideas, and know that we have this kind of mutual respect for each other. We're going to improve the work together. And then, fell in love with it.
So talk to us a bit about this. Like, so Frankenstein the Unconquered was not your first comic book that you worked together on.
Oddly, it kind of was.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, depending on how far back you want to go,
Yeah.
we technically started working on a graphic novel that is still exists as a script and that we do want to eventually produce. But the first thing that we put into print was what he just showed you, the Frankenstein Unconquered ash can, which was very do-it-yourself. Dalton drew everything. I lettered. It wasn't colored or anything. It was just handmade in the most literal sense. We started taking those to comic conventions and getting a little bit of a following that way, and learning more and more about comics as a business, and that grew and grew and grew. And we kept on kind of revisiting Frankenstein the Unconquered as a concept until eventually now we have an ongoing series with him.
Right. And so the first one you released, Kate, was released July 2022. This one is going to be released February 2023. So it looks like, are you planning on doing every 6 months a new issue?
It depends on the schedule of our artist. She's
Mary Landro.
Yeah.
Yes.
She's sort of dictating the pace of it, but we're hoping that the next Kickstarter that we do is 2 issues back to back. So we want to be able to knock these out a little bit faster if we can.
Start doubling up on issues with each campaign. Yeah.
And plus what you're doing as well, because you've done successful Kickstarters in the past, is what are some of the things that you learned from your previous Kickstarters that you guys are trying to do with this one?
Each campaign brings something new to it. Whether it's for our first campaign, we didn't have a trailer, and then the second campaign we had a trailer, saw that it helped, and now we do trailers. The marketing around it, just the sheer numbers game that kind of goes into Kickstarter,
adjusting our prices, doing more variant covers from more desirable artists.
And finding out what works for all ages doesn't always work for mature audiences, vice versa. And Kickstarter tends to do better with more mature content in general. It's been a learning experience every single campaign.
Right. And how has it been post COVID era times was there anything that had to be adjusted from a logistics perspective on the prices or anything?
Well, we really hadn't done much pre-COVID. Our first published work was a horror anthology, Descent into Dread, which we finished and managed to get published, I think, in June or July of 2020. So, and then we started doing Mechaton later that year and launched the Kickstarter in whenever it was, May of 21. So it's all been during or post-pandemic.
Which is wild to, now that we're saying it out loud, to think that all of the ash can stuff was pre-COVID, and now post-COVID is when things actually started.
Yeah,
that's weird to me. Wow.
And really, the reason we started doing that was because conventions were taken away from us, and that was what we were used to doing. So we knew we had to adapt and do something on a more online basis, and that was really healthy for us. We wound up doing a lot more effectively as a result.
Right. Well, then I guess my next question for you is, now that we are in, I like to consider this the pre-post era of COVID, what would be the advantages of doing a convention now, legitimately, with the fact that you've been so successful not doing it and being able to network successfully and promote your work digitally?
I think conventions are still extremely viable. If for nothing else than getting books in hands of people who aren't chronically online and depressed, or even know what a comic book is. Like so many people we are at conventions and we say, hey, do you like comics? And they're at a comic convention. They're like, no, not really. But then we can like show them Mechaton and their kid falls in love with it. And then they grab Mechaton. It's great to like get to actually see the people that you interact with online for one, put faces to Twitter handles, and also just get to meet new people and put books in hands. Because as much as the digital age is transformative for comics and literally everything else, to me nothing beats a physical book in your hand, and to just like have it in your hands and then give it to someone else to flip through. That I don't know, nothing can really replace that for me anyway.
So it's almost that it's almost as though it's like it's replacing it to create this networking and camaraderie event than it is an actual business transaction.
Exactly. I mean, certainly the cons are very helpful in terms of just of moving books and putting money in your pocket, especially really, really good cons. Arkansas Comic Con was really excellent for us, super busy, and we sold a lot of books there. And it also helps to, expand your market a little bit, find people that you would normally find. And if you're smart about it and write down emails and incentivize people to stick around, then they become online Kickstarter backers later on down the line. So, and
all this, all this, the Kickstarter stuff, the Twitter stuff, all of it can really start to feel kind of ethereal, like it's just kind of happening there. But like cons really make what we're doing tangible, and it feels real with boots on the ground and comics in hands. And that's when it really sets in and kind of locks in and makes it all feel real. Because like Kickstarter, I get super excited when I see those Kickstarter numbers go up too, but nothing really feels real until I have the book in my hand. So I love conventions.
Also, there's no better way to sharpen your ability to pitch your comic than having to sell it 100+ times at a convention to everyone who passes by that wants to know the slightest thing about it. You figure out real quickly what your log line is, just because it's not efficient to be talking to someone for 30 minutes about your comic and then they walk away. You need to be able to get to the heart of it immediately. Right. And that, feeds into everything else. I don't think it's an either or situation. I think it's very much an and plus, they feed into each other and they make the other stronger.
As I was saying before we went live, I've been really enjoying watching your other interviews, and just hearing you talk about the story of Frankenstein Unconquered. Talk about how you have this, a werewolf named Larry who's, part of a Lon Chaney inspired design, and also how the bride is popping up in issue 6, and can't wait for that to happen. So
you do your homework, yeah.
I'm so glad to know that we are as equally entertaining as Frankenstein. That's great. Okay.
So definitely check out some of your other interviews. So what I want to do is ask you different questions so that you don't have to kind of repeat yourself a bit on some of those pieces. My question to you is, how do you balance out the classical stories of the monsters, and then how do you balance that with, say, the interpretation that Universal Studios has with the monsters as well? And how do you balance that to kind of create your own Frankenstein or your own werewolf or your own future monsters?
It helps having an actual sandbox with rules that you kind of have to follow, because it's like with Frankenstein is public domain, but Universal's Frankenstein is not. So we know we can't have the big green forehead with the scar and the bolts on the neck. There are certain rules you have to play in, so that we know we can't do that. But we can take the kind of all the stuff around that. So the way Karloff portrays Frankenstein, or some of the side characters around, like there's a character in issue 2, Septimus Praetorius, who is a king more or less in this bombed out apocalypse that
I was
Frank
gonna
and the
say, like,
bride meet.
Emperor.
Emperor, yeah.
Yeah.
But that's literally just a name drop from Bride of Frankenstein. There was a character with that name in the and we also so we're taking little Easter eggs and nods from Universal, but also kind of combining it with the literature background from not only Shelley's novel, because to us that's canon, but also like werewolf myths, Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula, swamp monsters stuff, like the ether of folklore and monsters, and combining it with the Hollywood versions and also the literary versions, and kind of make Frankensteining them all together into the Frankenstein you see, so that it can actually feel kind of very ours. And and then you put a sword in his hand and it's done. Like, that's it.
I would say it's one part, you know, kind of figuring out what we like about the character and what works for us about the character in all of these interpretations. Like, what is the common thread, not just aesthetically, but like what makes us say, ooh, the wolf, you know, I really like werewolf stories. I love the, you know, what is cool about the Wolfman. In that case, it's, you know, kind of being out of control and having this kind of beast within that you can't, you know, you might have an idea of when it's going to come out, but ultimately once it's free, you know, there are questions of, is that still you? And that's like an interesting question to follow. So what kind of character comes out of that, and how can we best reflect that in the design of the monster? And what elements can we take that are already really well known and incorporate it in? We had a long talk about if we were going to do metal bolts for Frankenstein, because like iconic piece of, you know, Frankenstein lore from the movies is those neck bolts. Obviously, we can't rip those off completely, and they aren't a part of the novel's interpretation of Frankenstein. But maybe that's something we could incorporate into the design, and I think we do have an answer to that. It's not relevant quite yet in the story, but it is coming up. Just interesting ways to kind of fuse them together and say, you know, this is through confluence both the same and different than what you're used to seeing.
Right. No, because you mentioned you kind of created a little ashcan book first of Frankenstein. Did you first have the idea of a post-apocalyptic universal monster horror setting and picked Frankenstein, or did you say, I wonder what Frankenstein would be like in a Conan the Barbarian-esque?
Yeah, it
started out pretty dumb.
It was very much cosmic Frankenstein. I was like, let's put Frank in like a 1950s spacesuit, bubble helmet, send him through space with a sword and a ray gun and just fighting monsters. That just sounds cool. But then, like, you know, you see the long hair and you see the sword and you're like, oh, that's Conan. That's Conan. And then, like, your brain just kind of starts turning wheels, and the barbarian fiction side fell into place. And I'm not exactly sure where post-apocalyptic came from. I think I was literally just stream of consciousness writing that first script, and I don't know where that part came from, but it ended up being really thematically relevant to Frank himself. So we can take barbarian fiction and put it in a post-apocalyptic land, as well as Frankenstein himself. The character is just so malleable that I've always wanted to do something with that kind of monster. But we finally found the setting that kind of helps elevate that into something that feels kind of more our own than just like the latest spoof film or rip-off or whatever.
Now, did you also create once you realized that you had something here, did you then say, we need to set down some world building rules, for instance? Because some of the image, you got a dinosaur, just like, you know, let's just throw in this, are you just having fun with it, or did you say we need to establish rules?
There are some loose rules, but it is mostly just based on our gut feeling of like what fits in this universe, what works for the story. Obviously we're trying to, you know, keep it within some degree of reason. at the same time, the saying we've always stuck to is, if it belongs on a Megadeth album, it belongs in Frankenstein the Unconquered. It's like, you're kind of leading with the how cool the image is before you start to think about the logic of how it fits in the world. And there's definitely stuff I wouldn't put in Frankenstein. Oddly enough, one of the things that always stuck out to me as wrong, even though it is like a little bit Mad Max, like you'd have to have a really special occasion to have a car in Frankenstein the Unconquered. It just doesn't feel right to me at all to put like even an Oldsmobile in there. So yeah, I wouldn't say that we ever sat down and like hashed out the rules of the universe, but we are pretty much on the same page as to like what we can include and what should be in the world and what the texture of the world building is like. Which is a delight, makes it a delight to go back and return to and go, oh, what new stuff can we put in here? Yeah,
it's a very gut reaction kind of thing. Very, very Simpsons Springfield, where it's like we may not need it until just now, but now we're going to incorporate it into the world.
I feel like one day I'm gonna try my hand at like real epic fantasy, Song of Ice and Fire, like hard world building where there's a map and this is not really that.
I think the only Bible we have is Shelley's novel. That's it.
Yeah, we can't go back and say that like something in that didn't happen. That does, the old stories, and I would say, the Jekyll and Hyde novel, for example, is definitely informing how we're doing Jekyll and Hyde. The Dracula is definitely going to inform how we portray Dracula. It's not going to be the sole thing that we rely on. We are going to kind of make it malleable and tweak it in our own way. But like, we want to stay true to what makes these characters compelling and what made them work in the first place.
So I want to talk to the both of you about the business side of writing this. Now, how often did you have like, all right, we're going to set up some norms here. Like, all right, if we agree on one thing, we have to convince the other, or do you do what direction's happening? Or do you say, all right, we cannot move forward until we both agree on something? Or how does that work between the two of you?
It sort of depends on the project. Like for Frankenstein, I write a fair bit of dialogue for Frankenstein, but at the end of the day, Dalton almost always goes through and like kind of evens it out and makes it sound more like, what he has in mind for Frank. And that's mostly for the sake of, if you'll forgive the pun, not making it, so much of a Frankenstein's monster of a project. We don't want to have people thinking this sounds like it was written by two different people. We want it to feel very smooth. We want it to feel like a unified vision. So yeah, no, it's a lot of trust. It's a lot of like, we decide on the direction that we want to go. We work on a script at a time for the most part. And then pass it back and forth until we're both happy with it.
Yeah. It helps having like an established point man on each project. So like Wells has point on Mechaton, and he kind of gets final. Like we can go back and forth on scripts, but if Wells is adamant about something, I'll back off a bit. And same in Frankenstein, I have point. And like if we go draft by draft basis, so like he'll write a draft, I'll write a draft, but Wells is really great at like keeping us the direction going, and I tend to agonize over cadences and dialogue and. But it all, I think we've worked out a pretty seamless collaboration to where it doesn't feel super disjointed.
Right. And how do you prioritize this project together as compared to some of your own personal projects?
Good question. I think we just started writing these together and going forward, and then said, at some point we'll do our own thing, but for right now we just want to make stuff together. And there's already, there's already some stories that like Dalton's working on a thing right now that he's putting up on his website. I'm working on a comic with an artist that I can't talk about at the moment, but that will eventually come out. That is just my name on it. But there are some stories that we bring to each other that we're both really wide-eyed invested in and want to make the most of. And if we both have that sort of fervor about it, then it makes sense to put both our names on it, because we know we're going to, both work as hard as we can to make it as great as we possibly can.
Yeah, it tends that the solo projects tend to be a bit more personal to the individual writer.
Yeah.
And these collaborative projects are really like something we want to work with other people on and each other on, or simply it's a project that we can't realize without the other. Like there's something that's not working about it. Like Mechaton. We've been sitting on the Mechaton idea for like a decade, and something just was not clicking until Wells got his hands on it, and now it's even better than it ever could have been. Like, so it helps to have a sounding board and a collaborator, but then there are those projects that sometimes we just kind of want to breathe without the other, and it's been working out pretty well so far.
Mm-hmm. So talk to us about, we have a lot of, writers that like to listen to the podcast, and they might say, listen, Wells and Dalton, this is great advice. I got a project I'm working on, but how did you find Mary Landreau? How did you find her? How do I find my Mary Landreau? What would be your advice?
It's a lot of corkboards and strings and Twitter.
It's Twitter and Instagram and
Mary,
getting involved in the community, join a Discord, find people who who are looking for gigs and who you can collaborate with.
Alternatively, make comics, even if they're crappy. And if you're stupid enough like we were and go to a comic convention that's way too big for your britches, you'll meet an editor who will say, hey, these comics are great except for the art. Let me hook you up with some artists. And that's how we got Descent into Dreadmaid. That's how we met Mary. Like that was sheer dumb luck. But I find just like doing the work and making the comics or alternatively just like networking on the internet works beautifully. Like you're going to make connections even if you're not necessarily like looking for it. But
as long as you're not like a heinous person to be around, people are gonna, someone is gonna say, "Oh, I like you." I would be interested in working with you.
Just pay your artists.
So it's, and then the other thing is pay well, pay on time. And don't make promises you can't keep. And if you can't afford an artist, then look for anthologies. That can be a great way to connect with artists as well. Because very often on anthologies, they'll say, "Oh yeah, you can submit a script, and we'll, if we like it, we'll pair it with an artist that we know that's interested in being in it and doesn't have a story." I've worked with a couple artists through exactly that process. So really, it's there are a lot of different avenues in. I think the most expedient is just ponying up the cash, which is not an easy thing to hear. It's like, I wish it wasn't so like gate kept through that specific avenue, but it is what it is. We live in a world that runs on money.
And do you recommend like contracts?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would 100% recommend a contract.
Yeah.
even standing here like on several projects, I'm not using a contract. I would still probably recommend them, because the ones that you have, like, it just helps you not to get yourself in a bad position. Essentially,
it keeps the water clear. Like even Wells and I have contracts. You just gotta. It's art, but it's also a business, and so you just want to try and make it as clean as possible.
Yeah. And I did notice too, because you also have like a colorist and a letterer. You'd recommend too, if you're doing it, to don't find someone who does it all, but find different roles?
I think it depends.
Yeah, it depends on the project, what it means for each artist. Like, like, I mean, if we could find somebody who did everything exceptionally well, a consummate cartoonist, then we we may have considered them for Frank, but their style may not have been for Frank, you know?
Right.
Like the style for Frank is Mary and Dahlia and Nathan and Brenda. Like we want that team, like that brings Frank to life. But so it's really just a project by project basis. I have nothing but respect for cartoonists who can do everything.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
If
That's what I want to be.
Given the opportunity, yeah, absolutely. But almost every time I ask, you know, if I find an artist, I'll ask, you know, do you want to color, or do you want me to find someone to color it for you so you can just focus on the inks? And most of the time, they just want to do the one thing, both for expediency and so that they can kind of focus on it a little bit more clearly.
Mm-hmm.
They're not thinking ahead about, you know, what is this going to be like to letter, or what is this going to be like to color or whatnot. And then the other thing is, unless you are like truly like have put in the work and are talented and really like are up to snuff about it, don't try and take shortcuts and do it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It never works out. I know a lot of writers
practice.
Yeah, I know a lot of writers that go in and be like, well, it's lettering, it can't be that hard. It is that hard. It is absolutely that hard.
It is an art form into itself.
Yeah, and I want someone working on the book that is as dedicated to the craft of lettering as I am to the craft of writing. Mm-hmm. And I know I'm not as dedicated to lettering as I am to writing, so I would rather find someone who's really good at it.
Right. And what's one thing that you noticed when you're working on issue 2 of Frankenstein the Unconquered that either a business savvy thing that you started doing, or a production thing that you wished you did 5 projects ago?
Well, we lowered our costs,
Mm-hmm.
or rather, we lowered our prices, I should say, because we wanted. We looked back and saw that some of the higher end stuff people weren't really gravitating toward. And we figured that was because as much as we were offering with, for example, the everything tier, where we give you like, you know, everything in one convenient package, sometimes the price tag was just a bit too high. And so we figured by kind of reducing the amount of what's in it and also lowering the price, it would attract more people to go get it. And that was absolutely the case. It's our most well, it's not our most popular by number, but it is our most popular in terms of percentage of like the money that's come in, is that tier. Let's see, we started doing 3 variant covers instead of just 2, one of which is this being a PG channel, I'll just say not safe for work cover. It's but that was to play specifically into like more of the pulp elements of the comic. Mm-hmm. So we felt it was appropriate for the story that we were telling and for the comic we were producing and the vibe that we were going for. But equally the other part of the reason why we put that cover on there is because we knew that people on Kickstarter tend to like those, and it has absolutely paid dividends as a result.
Mm-hmm. It's also been like just going from Frank 1 to Frank 2, like the team is in like much more of a lockstep now. Mm-hmm. Like we had a few speed bumps at the beginning, you know, trying to figure out the colors that would go well with Mary's inks and how to get those letters, because Mary has fantastic layouts, but sometimes it's like, how do I letter this? So like we had a little bit of a bump, but like now we're all kind of, we know how everybody works, and pages can turn around a little easier, and it all just feels a lot more smooth and assured.
Absolutely. Uh-huh. Yeah, there's been lots of little things that we've done differently for this campaign that have all worked in our favor, and that we'll definitely be replicating in the future.
I love the idea of advertising space. I haven't seen that before.
Yeah, our PR guy, Jeff, recommended that we add it, and we had been kind of debating whether or not it would be a good idea, but we went ahead and threw it on. It seems to be popular. So
that's amazing. And I want to talk to you because you did this with Frankenstein, your first one. whose idea was it to create a one-shot tabletop role-playing game?
Well, like all things you're saying, like everything kind of flows together.
Right.
You know, you have one success, so you do one thing and it leads to another, We were doing a lot of conventions. While we were out there, we met this guy, Jacob Fleming. You know, it was slow during convention. We started talking. He's another comics guy, but he also does tabletop RPG stuff. So we talked to him, and he was really interested in the idea of like doing exactly that, having a tabletop RPG kind of in the universe of the comic. And we talked about the ideas and some of the mechanics and like how we could make it stand out and unique. And he made a really, really cool game as a result. So it was both us trying to find something kind of unique to give to people who were really interested in the comic and really wanted to like throw a little bit more money down to support us, and us, happening to know someone who was perfect for the job. And those kind of worked, eventually worked together to make Deathstalks the Damned, which is a really fun game.
No, do you? So Dalton, do you play tabletop role-playing games?
Play is a generous term. I have tried tabletop RPGs for like it seems like 10 years now, but nothing ever seems to really get off the ground. It's me and my friend group is not the group to do tabletop RPGs with. Things go off the rails very quickly.
It's a lot of ADHD kids just being like,
when can we blow something up?
Yeah.
So do you have so the one-shot tabletop role-playing game that's on there, does it have an existing game mechanic that exists or is this a brand new game mechanic?
I believe it's Mutants World or if
Mutant World or Mutants World or something like that.
It's listed in the first page, like what the rule set is and where you can find like detailed online step-by-step how to play it. So we didn't want to like make a 30-page manual where most of it is just explaining the rules. So so yeah, no, it just briefly says, here's where you can find the rules. Here's everything that you need to play it. Let's get on with like the characters, the lore, what you're going to need to go forward.
Although after seeing Jacob's last Kickstarter campaign, making like a big game master's manual for Frankenstein the Unconquered does not sound like a bad idea, Wells.
So what are some things that you want to put in that you wish you did for like add-ons or tiers? It's like, I always wanted to have a keychain with Frankenstein. Is there anything on there that the two of you would personally say, I know we can't right now, but one of these days I really want to have this just for my own selfish purposes?
We put on for our last stretch goal of $15,000. We put on that we would make and distribute enamel pins for everybody, and I would absolutely love to do that. Like a really, really nice looking enamel pin would be great. Someone mentioned the other day that they were looking for patches to put on their leather jacket, and I was like, that would be kind of fun.
Like the patch on the back of John's jacket? That'd be great.
That'd be great.
No, a lot of stuff is just like ideas that I know we can't do because they're just prohibitively expensive to produce.
Yeah.
But like I think it would be awesome to have like those old 60s and 70s Universal Monster model kits where you just pop out the pieces and clip them together and then you have to hand paint them. I would love to have one of Frankenstein, but that's never going to happen.
Yeah, I don't even know if that's
much.
Like capable of like, if you had a 3D printer, we would even be capable of making that necessarily. But
or for like Mechaton, just getting a Mechaton glove, that would be great.
We did briefly consider like Funko Pops for a little while, but
like custom pops,
entirely too expensive to make.
So how many issues have you already written out so far?
Frank's, we have 13 first drafts of all the
first drafts.
The series.
And we try and pass a few, a couple times back and forth before they're finished. But
Wells writes a very issue at a time, and I go on like a 2-week tear until I'm done with a series. So with Frank, I was like, all right, it's done. And Wells is like, dude, we haven't even done
It's
issue
like,
one
I
yet."
haven't even read the first 3 issues. And he's
Yeah, they're like, we'll
it's
chisel
done.
it away later. It's great.
No, is it going to be Dalton an ongoing series, or is this going to be like 13 issues done? What's
We're
your
not-
idea?
Yeah, I don't think we're closing it off
Mhm.
by
Okay.
any means.
Frankenstein the Unconquered, I think, will reach its end at 13. But whatever adjective comes later, it's anybody's
Okay.
guess. Yeah, we don't know.
Frankenstein the Unbothered, Frankenstein
Unbothered.
And that kind of fits along with the Conan theme, right?
Mhm.
The
Mhm.
Conan. And, yeah. Now, are you going to introduce, basically, as you mentioned earlier, we already know about the Bride of Frankenstein's there. We already know that Larry the werewolf is going to be there. Do you have any other? Are you trying to go across the board? All of the Universal monsters, have them introduced at
Yeah.
least once.
The whole pantheon's gonna be there.
More or
Like,
less.
Okay.
Invisible
Yeah.
Man, Mummy, Creature, Dracula, Phantom shows up. The Phantom issue's great. Hell, even
Abbott and
Abbott and Costello were gonna show
Abbott
up.
and Costello.
Like,
Nice.
you guys are not ready for that issue.
No, we're not ready for that.
Wells hasn't even read it yet.
Mary certainly isn't ready for it.
Cool. Well, this is great, guys. It's been such a genuine pleasure chatting with the two of you
Yes.
about your series. Really looking forward
So
to
much
it.
fun.
I loved issue 1. I loved where it was going with that, and it definitely does have that Conan homage. And I love the idea of throwing in the Universal monsters in a post-apocalyptic world theme. That's amazing.
Mhm.
So,
Thank you.
perfect. Well, once again, congratulations
Thank you.
on reaching your goal, and it's onward and upward from here. So
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
yeah, and come back on for issue 3. So yeah, we'll have to
Heck
chat.
yeah.
I'd love to.
All right. I try to nerd up. I got my Avengers winter cardigan
yeah.
on, so
No,
I
I
got
love
that.
that.
going, so-
That's what. Okay, I noticed. there
I'm
was
gonna be
winter cardigan
honest.
there,
It took
but-
me until exactly now to realize that you're wearing a pink shirt and that you're not just like open canvas with a tattoo across the chest. I was like,
Oh no!
I respect the style. I'm not even gonna question it, but
He chose not to swear, and he's walking around with a bare chest. It actually is a bare chest. See, it is a
is,
bear
yeah.
on here. See, yeah,
That-
yeah.
That's some energy.
love that.
I should dress more appropriately next time.
All it takes is just one time, just a time.